Today is my 38th birthday, and if you've been following the channel for a while, now you know how old I am. I'm almost 40, which is ridiculous, but I thought it'd be fun for my 38th birthday to talk about my 38 favorite guitarists. This is a nice big number. I was able to get most of my favorite guitarists in here. I will do some honorable mentions as well, because there's some guitarists that I really enjoy that didn't quite make it on the list. You're going to notice some notable exclusions from this list as well. There's a lot of my favorite bands, for example, where the guitarists aren't necessarily in my top favorite guitarists, even though bands might be some of my favorites, because a lot of times I'll listen to bands more for the overall compositions and the songwriting, maybe the riffs, maybe the drums or bass, whatever, but not necessarily just specifically for the guitar. Now, a lot of my favorite bands will be included on this list because certain bands I do really enjoy the guitar playing as well as just the overall songwriting. I thought this would be a fun video to put together that wouldn't take me too much time so I can enjoy my birthday this week. I will still be dropping a video on Friday, and that will include something that will go onto my Patreon page. If you'd like to join there, you'll actually get access to some of the tabs for solos from some of these guitarists, as well as all sorts of other good stuff on there. So let's get into my list. I've split this list into multiple genres just to make it easy for me to organize. Of course, guitarists can go across multiple genres, but it's an easy way for me to put this together. First, we're going to start with prog, rock, and metal guitarists, obviously, because this is the Prog School. We've got some honorable mentions. Some of these are from my favorite bands, but the guitarists aren't necessarily making this list. So Steven Wilson from Porcupine Tree, the guys from Haken, the guys from Pain of Salvation like Daniel, Opeth, the guitarists from Leprous or Persephone, guitarists like Steve Hackett and Steve Howe. I love Yes and Genesis, but those don't make my list in this particular case because I'm thinking more about the compositions with those bands than I do about the guitarists specifically. So my actual list for prog, rock, and metal guitarists, there's some obvious ones. Obviously, John Petrucci and Michael Romeo, those are the two biggest guitarists for me when I was younger. Really kind of got me into prog. Dream Theater and Symphony X were my favorite bands for a long time, so those are obvious inclusions on here. Alex Lifeson is the next one. Rush is another one of my favorite bands, and I love Lifeson's playing. I think he's super underrated, specifically for his riffs and his chord work. In fact, I did a whole big lesson a few years ago on the chords of Rush, the chords of Alex Lifeson. Definitely worth checking out if you want to learn some of those, but definitely an underrated guitarist that I love. Next up is David Gilmour, probably my favorite prog rock guitarist. And I know that's maybe super cliche because it's like David Gilmour puts so much emotion into every single note. But really for me, it's because I like the way his solos are constructed within Pink Floyd. I think they really add a lot to the songs. And it doesn't really matter how many notes you play. Sometimes a song might call for more notes. It's just about doing the right thing for the song. And I think David Gilmour always did that. So it's not necessarily about him just being like a melodic guitarist. I do like that element of it, but it's just that I think his playing fits the feel of the band really well, and I love Pink Floyd. Next, we have Tosin Abasi, another guitarist from one of my favorite bands, Animals as Leaders. And for Tosin, what I love about his playing is it's so creative and innovative, all the different extended techniques that he's really brought into modern guitar. I'm not even that big of a fan of his lead playing necessarily, but I love his riffs, I love his use of rhythm, and I love his use of extended techniques. And Animals as Leaders just has such a original, unique sound, and a lot of that is due to his playing. Next up is Sam Vallen from Caligula's Horse, another one of my favorite bands. Sam's playing is just incredibly beautiful and fits the music perfectly. And I really like how thoughtful all his guitar parts are, his riffs and his solos. It doesn't seem like he's wasting any notes, even though he's doing a lot sometimes. And lastly, from the prog rock and metal list is Paul Wagoneer of Between the Buried and Me. Of course, Between the Buried and Me is another one of my favorite bands. And really, I could probably include Dusty on this list as well, since he was part of most of the albums that really inspired me, although he's not in the band anymore. And for me, it's not the solos necessarily. I don't think he writes the best solos all the time, although some of them are great. But it's really just the creative element of Between the Buried and Me and all the really interesting riffs and ideas that happen throughout their music. It's been really inspiring to me over the years. All right, next we have just general rock and metal guitarists. Some honorable mentions are Hendrix. I love Jimi Hendrix. He was very inspiring to me when I was younger, but I don't listen to a ton of that kind of music anymore. But he has to be on a list like this, right? Hendrix is one of the most important, probably the most important electric guitarist of all time. Randy Rhoads was a massive influence for me early on. I loved listening to those first Ozzy records and learning a lot of those riffs. So he's got to be on here as an honorable mention. Jimmy Page, because I love Led Zeppelin. Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, a lot of your sort of cliche guitar heroes. I'm not really that kind of a guitarist anymore, but I think earlier on in my playing, those were really inspiring to me. For metal guitarists, my honorable mentions are Jason Becker, Love his playing. Maybe if he'd been able to play a little bit longer, he would have made it onto the list. But I really was inspired by a lot of his sweep picking stuff when I was younger. Brandon Ellis, a modern guitarist, metal guitarist that I absolutely love. His vibrato is ridiculous and something I should probably steal since my vibrato needs some work still. But I absolutely love the way he constructs his solos. It's really, really interesting ideas throughout all of his solos. Very musical and also very chop heavy at the same time. Jason Richardson is another one, mostly just because he's such a technical freak and it's amazing to watch him play and try to learn some of that stuff. But I've never liked his music enough for him to be on this list. And then the last one would be Wes Houch, who I absolutely love his playing as well in all the bands he's been in. Such creative ideas with his soloing, kind of like Brandon Ellis. You get really interesting ideas through their solos, but still obviously very technically proficient. First up for my actual rock and metal guitarist list is Eddie Van Halen. This is an obvious one. I learned so much Van Halen when I was younger. I'm really not good at replicating Van Halen. I've never been great at doing it properly, but I just remember learning a lot of the ideas and techniques from the first Van Halen record specifically. And that was super inspiring to a 16-year-old kid. So Van Halen's got to make it on the list. And he's one of the most influential guitarists of all time. So that's really the only rock guitarist on my list. And the rest of these are metal guitarists. So we've got Jeff Loomis. I've been on a big Nevermore kick lately since they just announced that they're coming back with new music. And listening to Nevermore now, I'm just even more impressed with Jeff Loomis's playing. And of course, I loved all of his solo albums too. And I really loved the Conquering Dystopia album he did in 2014 with Keith Merrow. Just such an incredible guitarist. I actually really like his riffing as much as I like his lead playing. And Nevermore wrote some really interesting music. He kind of took the Yngwie thing, and he does some of that, neoclassical kind of stuff, but really took it in a heavier, more modern direction. Such an inspiring player. Next, we have Dave Davidson of Revocation. Everyone knows that I'm a big Revocation fan if you've watched this channel at all. And for them, it's really because of his guitar playing. I like the songs and I think they're fun, but I listen to Revocation for the riffs and for the solos specifically. And his playing is absolutely incredible. I've learned a couple of Revocation solos. I have a few covers on the channel. And every time I learn one, I learn a bunch of ideas because he brings in that jazz fusion kind of influence into the death metal thing. Very cool. And his riffs are really weird and hard to play. But they always sound awesome, and he uses some really great chords that you don't hear in that kind of music very often. Another obvious one is Marty Friedman. I was a massive fan of Rust in Peace, specifically Megadeth, but everything that Marty's done. And what I really stole from Marty was the half-step bends. I do that kind of stuff all the time, and that's definitely a Marty Friedman thing. But I remember learning all of those solos from Rust in Peace, probably not very well because I was 18 or whatever. But such an inspiring guitarist. I think he'd probably make the list of a lot of, modern metal guitarists. Very, very influential guitarist for me. Another one is Kiko Loureiro from Angra. He also played with Megadeth for a while, but specifically for me, the Temple of Shadows album by Angra, his playing is just so fluid. And when you watch him play, it's like he's putting no effort into it, but he's doing this incredible stuff. Such an amazing guitarist, one of my absolute favorite metal guitarists. Next, we have a more modern guitarist. This is Raquel Trijullo, I believe is how you pronounce it. He's a guitarist. He played with Obscura for a little while, but I know him more from Obsidious, which is his newest band. He also plays with Doth right now, too. But Obsidious, the album they put out a couple of years ago, is absolutely amazing, and I really fell in love with his playing right away. I think he has everything you'd want from a modern metal guitarist. The tone, the technique, the riffs. I actually purchased the official tab book for their last album because I didn't feel like transcribing some of this stuff. And I've learned a few solos and riffs, and it's absolutely ridiculous stuff. So hard to play. I need to put some more time into it, but he's a very inspirational guitarist for me right now. And lastly, I've got to include Yngwie Malmsteen on here. I know he's kind of a meme now, but Yngwie, when he was young, was kind of in the same world as Hendrix and Van Halen as far as how inspirational he's been for a lot of guitarists and how sort of important he is, really. One of the most important electric guitarists, kind of spearheaded the whole neoclassical thing. I know he wasn't the first one to do it, but he kind of really took it to the next level. And so much of what you hear in modern metal guitar comes from Yngwie. And his playing when he was younger is absolutely ridiculous. Go watch some videos of him from, 1984, 85. Absolutely crazy. Obviously, his music has gotten kind of stale and boring now, and is kind of a joke. But he is really inspiring to a lot of people, and he was to me, especially when I was younger. Next up, we have instrumental guitarists, and these are mostly rock guitarists that play primarily instrumental music. All of these guitarists have been in bands with singers at some point, but for me, I know these guitarists from instrumental musics they put out as solo artists typically. So two obvious ones are Steve Vai and Joe Satriani. When I was a kid, those were some of my favorite guitarists. I still do a lot of that like Satriani style legato, and a lot of my tapping stuff I got from Steve Vai originally. Just such inspiring guitarists. I love the melodies that Satriani writes. I think he's a master of writing good sounding guitar melodies, and I've taken a lot of inspiration from that. And then Vai with his sort of quirky style, all the whammy bar stuff. So much of that stuff I've stolen from Vai and Satriani. Absolutely love them as players. I think pretty obvious ones for someone of my age group. Another obvious one is Eric Johnson. This is like a guitarist. I still try to work on those like cascading pentatonic stuff, and I end up throwing a lot of that stuff into my music at some point. Even though I can't really like replicate the tone and touch very well of Eric Johnson, but just such an inspiring guitarist. I love his chord work. Obviously, there's Cliffs of Dover is a classic, but so much of his music is incredible. I remember watching that Austin City Limits thing he did. I guess that would have been like 1990, I believe. That was one of my favorite guitar concerts of all time. I still watch that every once in a while and just be blown away by the fluidity of his playing. And of course, the tone is just like next level. And then another guitarist with incredible tone, probably like my holy grail tone, would be Andy Timmons. This is another guitarist. And I've loved Andy Timmons for a long time. I remember learning some of the stuff off of his Resolution album. And of course, songs like Electric Gypsy and Cry for You. Such a emotional guitarist, if you can use that word, but such a melodic guitarist. Incredible touch and feel, and of course tone. I actually bought a Mesa Boogie Stiletto when I was younger just because of Andy Timmons playing. That was that inspiring to me. So definitely someone you should check out if you haven't, although I think most guitarists probably know who Andy Timmons is these days. Next up is an obvious one for me, and that's Paul Gilbert. A lot of the picking chops I got from watching those first two instructional DVDs of his. And then I loved all the Racer X stuff. Of course, I still will warm up sometimes with technical difficulties. But I really loved his first couple solo albums. And of course, now he's turned into more of like a blues rock guitarist, which, isn't my favorite style, but he does really good job at it. He's kind of turned into a more melodic player as he's gotten older, which is cool, but he can still do the shreddy stuff. I think Paul Gilbert's an obvious choice for a lot of guitarists my age as well, kind of like Satriani and Vai. Kind of fits in that same category, like crazy, shreddy instrumental guitarist. But Paul Gilbert had the picking thing down. His picking is just so accurate and precise, and the tone and feel and timing of it all is really, really inspiring. So Paul Gilbert has to make this list. Another guitarist that also has to make this list is Marco Sfogli. I knew him originally from playing with James LaBrie on his solo albums, but then especially from his own solo albums that he put out, especially his first two solo albums. The song Andromeda to me is still like one of the greatest instrumental guitar songs of all time. In fact, I need to do a lesson on that sometime because it has a really cool time signature thing happening. But his playing is like a combination of Petrucci and Andy Timmons. So he's got like the technique and the speed and the complexity of like a Petrucci, but he's got the feel and tone of like an Andy Timmons. Just such an incredible player. One you should definitely check out if you haven't before. It's amazing to watch him play, and it's the kind of playing I wish I could do, at least better than I can now. So he's got to make this list. And the last instrumental guitarist on here I'm going to include is Andy Wood. He's someone I found out about from YouTube, and there's actually going to be a couple of guys on here that I found out from YouTube, which is cool. It's cool to be able to discover guitarists in a different way than just listening to their albums. But Andy Wood obviously can do the like chicken picking country thing. He's an incredible bluegrass player, but he's also a really great shredder and rock guitarist. He has incredible picking technique and do all the cross picking stuff. Really good tone, timing. I've loved his solo albums, the last couple ones he's done, where he's got the like southern rock country thing, but then it's mixed with some shred in there as well. As someone who's played in some country cover bands, a guitarist like Andy Wood is really inspiring because he can do the country southern rock thing, but also he can shred, and he does it in a really nice way. So I've learned a lot of things from him as far as like trying to combine those different styles together. All right, next up is actually the longest list on here, and that's fusion guitarists. So it's not even the prog rock and metal guitarists, it's the fusion guitarists that are on here. Because when I think of jazz fusion, I'm really thinking more about the players than am about the songs, because there's so much improvisation and soloing in this kind of music. Although I do enjoy a lot of the music as well, but a lot of times I'm thinking more about the specific player when I'm listening to this style of music. Some honorable mentions are Al Di Meola and John McLaughlin. Those acoustic albums they did with Paco de Lucia were really inspiring to me when I was younger. But as I've gotten older, I'm less into their playing, although I do really still enjoy their playing. And I love Mahavishnu Orchestra and Return to Forever, some of my favorite early fusion bands. First up in the fusion list is, of course, Guthrie Govan, one of my absolute favorite guitarists. He'd probably make a list of my top 5 guitarists, if not at the very top, but at least pretty close. I was so inspired by him early on, watching those early YouTube videos, like I think a lot of people my age were. And Erotic Cakes, I actually listed it as one of my top 10 albums of all time when I did that video a couple of years ago. I wish he'd put out another solo album, although I love all the Aristocrats stuff. I've seen them a couple times live. It's very inspiring to watch him play live. Just such an incredible guitarist, so good at so many different styles of music, has such an original sound. He can play so technical, but also so musical at the same time. He's got the quirky side of the playing, but also has that sort of emotional side to his playing as well. Like the solos he did on the Steven Wilson solo albums, that stuff is so incredible. One of my absolute favorite guitarists. Next up is Greg Howe, another one of my favorite fusion guitarists. I love the way that Greg plays. I remember copying quite a few of those legato ideas that he does, like the kind of punchy legato stuff. And of course, the sliding vibrato has such a original sound to his playing. When I hear him play, I know that that's Greg Howe. I remember spending a lot of time listening to Soundproof, the album he put out in 2008. I played that all the time. Absolutely love that album. Such an incredible guitarist. Next up is Frank Gambale, maybe the most scary technical guitarist of all time, or one of them. All of the economy picking and sweep picking stuff that he does is absolutely ludicrous. I remember spending a lot of time with the speed picking booklet, which is really a sweep picking booklet or economy picking, and trying to learn the scales, with economy picking and all of those big sweep picking shapes. Every time I hear him play, I'm thinking like, how do you do that? Even at his age now, it's just so fluid, but also really complex, the lines he's playing and playing over some of those insane changes. There's a solo he did on Gotta Match. There's a video on YouTube with Chick Corea, the electric band, that still just blows my mind. I was like, how can you do that? How can you do that to begin with? But how can you improvise that? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. Frank Gambale has to be on this list. Next is Brett Garsed, one of my favorite legato-based players. He's a guitarist from Australia, has incredibly smooth and incredible sounding legato. So rhythmically even, such interesting chromatic ideas. I remember copying a lot of the sort of chromatic ideas he does, because he does it in a way where it's not super outside sounding, like Alan Holdsworth, for example, who's not on this list, because I really appreciate Holdsworth playing, but I don't necessarily like listening to it too much. Whereas Brett Garsed has those legato chops, but he does it in more of a way that to me sounds a little more musical. Maybe it's just because my ears are, not good enough to listen to a ton of Holdsworth. But I really enjoy his playing. Absolutely should check him out if you haven't. Next is a Russian guitarist, Feodor Dosumov. I remember learning about him from the JTC stuff on YouTube. Kind of like has the Vi whammy bar chops and stuff, but then can do all the fusion things, absolutely crazy tapping lines. Now he plays with like a thumb pick, so he's doing weird finger picking, kind of sweeping stuff. Absolutely crazy guitarist. The band he put together, I can't remember, back in 2011, Impact Fuse, that album, absolutely amazing. He also did an album with his brother who lives near me here in Seattle. I've actually played with him a few times. They did an album a few years ago, which is also great as well. So you definitely check him out as well. Next is another YouTube guitarist. That's Tom Quayle. I mean, it's putting him down to call him a YouTube guitarist, but that's where I learned about him. If you want to talk about the most precise, perfect legato, that's Tom Quayle. I've learned so many Tom Quayle licks, just like, listening on YouTube and transcribing them, trying to get it down. Like, that is not my style of playing at all, but such an inspirational guitarist. Next is a newer guitarist that a lot of people would have on their list now, and that's Matteo Mancuso. The stuff he does is just ridiculous. I don't understand. He's going to end up being one of the best electric guitarists of all time since he's so young and he's so good already. Obviously, because he's finger picking, he can do a lot of really interesting wide interval stuff. I need to kind of pick up some more of that from him, but such an incredible guitarist. And I really enjoyed his last album as well. I thought there's some good songs on there too. Next, we've got maybe the craziest guitarist of all time, and that's Sean Lane. I remember watching those old Sean Lane videos and just being absolutely mind blown by the playing, and I still am when I listen to it. Maybe the fastest guitarist that's ever lived, but even more than that, I thought his music was really interesting. It might sound kind of dated now, but the Powers of 10 album is a really great album. There's some really good songs on there, and of course, you can watch his scary YouTube videos if you want to, hate yourself as a guitarist. But I've learned quite a few things from Sean Lane. A lot of that like wide interval stuff that I'll do is from Sean Lane, especially the stuff that sounds really outside. You can create some really crazy sounding licks without too much work if you learn some Sean Lane ideas. And lastly on the fusion list is another YouTube guitarist, and that's Martin Miller. Once again, it's putting him down to call him a YouTube guitarist. And he's maybe more in like just the generic rock category now because of what he does with his original music as well as the covers he's doing on YouTube these days. But I kind of knew him more earlier on when he did more fusion style playing. A really good modern guitarist, has incredible picking technique. He can do all the Dream Theater, Petrucci kind of stuff, but has that fusion edge to his playing. Really great tone, timing, and technique. An awesome guitarist. All right, now we've got some categories where there aren't a ton of players on here, but some really important ones to me. Next up is blues guitarist. A couple honorable mentions. Josh Smith, he's a newer blues guitarist. Absolutely amazing. Love his playing. And then Gary Moore, big Gary Moore fan. Kind of that like hyper hot-rodded blues. He got some like shreddy ideas, but still very bluesy. But for me, the one blues guitarist that has to make this list is Stevie Ray Vaughan. One of my absolute favorite guitarists. If I put together a top 10 list, he would be on it. No questions. And I can't really play like Stevie Ray Vaughan very well, although I've actually been working on some of that kind of stuff recently because I feel like it's a area of my playing that could use improvement. But just the aggressiveness of his playing, like that's for me, that's one thing I try to take into my playing, especially when I'm playing live, is that just attack when he's playing. Like he just feels like he's gonna destroy the guitar every time he's playing it. Once again, his Austin City Limits thing, just like Eric Johnson, that concert was so inspiring to me, and I still go back and watch some of that one as well. His version of Little Wing is incredible. I got to sit down and actually learn that at some point. But he's one of the hardest guitarists to replicate the sound of. It's just really difficult to sound like Stevie Ray Vaughan. He was such an original voice on the guitar. And even though he's living, mostly in the pentatonic world, just something about the way he played was so incredible and so inspiring. So he's got to make this list. Next, we got some jazz guitarists. We have two Pats. My favorite jazz guitarist, Pat Metheny. I've talked about Pat Metheny on the channel before. I just love Pat Metheny. I love his music. I love his playing. Such an original guitarist, original sound. And also Pat Martino. He's more of a straight ahead jazz guitarist, or was more of a straight ahead jazz guitarist, but really inspirational playing, especially with his picking technique. Pat Martino is a guitarist you definitely should check out. And then Joe Pass, another one of my favorite jazz guitarists. I think a lot of people would cite Joe Pass as an inspiration as far as like jazz guitar goes. All of that solo jazz guitar stuff is absolutely incredible. I've learned probably most of my jazz guitar voicings and ideas from Joe Pass. There's some instructional DVDs I watched, but also just learning a few of his songs as well. So the limited jazz guitar vocabulary I have, most of that came from Joe Pass. And lastly, I wanted to include a gypsy jazz guitarist on here because I absolutely love gypsy jazz, probably my favorite style of jazz these days. And my favorite gypsy jazz guitarist would be Yosho Stefan, who runs an awesome YouTube channel where he's teaching gypsy jazz as well as bringing on a bunch of different guests. His playing is ridiculous. The cleanest, clearest, fastest, most articulate acoustic guitar playing you'll ever hear, especially with a pick. And he can do all the gypsy stuff, but he has some like modern sort of techniques in there as well. I've been transcribing a few of his solos and trying to learn some of the licks. I thought it'd be fun to kind of try to bring some of those into, the prog world. Really, really great guitarist. Definitely check him out. Next, we've got a couple of acoustic and classical guitarists. I actually have a classical guitar degree, if you didn't know that. It's my classical guitar sitting back there collecting dust because I haven't played it for a while. But I spent a lot of time studying classical guitar, obviously. And my favorite classical guitarist is John Williams, not the composer. There's a guitarist, John Williams. And with classical guitar, it's interesting because Some of them did compose as well, but a lot of times with the players, like with John Williams, he's playing other people's music, right? So it's not necessarily about his writing. It's more about his actual playing and his interpretation of the music he's playing. But the way that he plays Bach and Villalobos and all that stuff is just absolutely incredible. Of course, Segovia, he's like the goat of classical guitar, and there's plenty of other awesome classical guitarists. But for me, John Williams was always my favorite in the way that he played the classical pieces that I was studying at the time. And then as far as acoustic guitar goes, it's got to be Tommy Emmanuel. Always been my favorite acoustic guitarist. I think probably the best acoustic guitarist in the world, best steel string acoustic guitarist in the world. I've learned a couple of his solo pieces. It's always so musical and so beautiful. He can command a stage for 3 hours with his playing. And he's just so joyful in his playing, even in his older years. Watching him play, it just feels like he's one with the music all the time. Such an inspiring player. And lastly, I want to include one country guitarist on here because I actually have played quite a bit of country guitar over the years. And my favorite country guitarist is Brent Mason, another guitarist. He's like the Nashville session guy, especially back in the 90s, but even still now. But Hot Rodded, that song is ridiculous. And just watching him play all the time is amazing. There's a solo he did, like a live solo he did. I can't remember the name of the song, but he's doing the most insanely fast chicken picking I've ever seen. It's a style of guitar that I can't really do very well, but one that's super inspiring to me. And I love listening to guitarists play stuff that I can't do because I haven't spent the time to, study how to play country guitar that well. But it's really inspiring to me. And I do, try to pick up some things here and there from guitarists like that. So that concludes my 38 guitarist list. I'll include all 38 of these guitarists in the description so you can check them out. I'll put them on the screen here right now. If there's a few of these you haven't checked out before, definitely go ahead and do that. I'd imagine most of you here probably know the prog, rock, and metal guitarists, since that's what I do here on the Prog School. So go check out some of the fusion guitarists or the jazz guitarists if you haven't before. And let me know in the comments your favorite guitarists. I'd really be interested to know. You don't have to list 38. You could list however many you want, top 10, whatever, or even just your favorite couple of guitarists. I probably missed a few as I did this. I did spend some time putting this list together, but as I was going, there was more honorable mentions that I wanted to put on there. There's probably a few you'll be like, how'd you leave this person off? So put it in the comments and I'll say, yeah, of course I left that person off. I can't believe that I did. But I think I got most of the main ones here. And as I said, these are the guitarists that really inspired me over the years and really informed my playing and my writing. Guitarists that were part of my favorite bands or guitarists that I just remember watching in awe and learning a lot of licks and ideas from. So there are my top 38 guitarists for my 38th birthday. I'm going to go enjoy the rest of my birthday now. But if you like this video, subscribe, hit the bell notification, like, comment, share, all of that. And I will be back next week for our regular scheduled lessons. Until then, stay proggy.